The sky turned dark as storm clouds gathered over the rocky landscape of Dracos. Liliana checked her equipment one last time, her blue fingers moving quickly over the scanner. The tiny moon was not a place anyone wanted to stay long. Her heart beat faster as she looked at the readings. Something was wrong. Team Leader Maxis, I'm picking up unusual movement patterns, she said into her communicator. The Crawl are gathering in large numbers near Sector 7. Only static answered her. Liliana adjusted her device and tried again. Expedition Team, please respond. This is researcher Liliana reporting increased Crawl activity. A broken voice finally came through. Fall back. Immediate extraction. Overwhelmed. Liliana's 4 eyes widened in alarm. She packed her equipment quickly and began running toward the extraction point. Her slender legs carried her over the rough terrain as fast as they could. The thin air of Dracos made it hard to breathe as she pushed herself forward. Behind her, she heard the first screams. The Crawl had found some of her team members. The sound made her skin pale from its normal purple to a sickly lavender. The extraction point was just beyond the next ridge. Liliana climbed as fast as she could, her hands scraping against sharp rocks. When she reached the top, she saw the dropship already lifting off. "Wait," she screamed, waving her arms. "I'm here. I'm still alive." Either they couldn't hear her over the engine noise, or they had already counted her among the dead. The ship rose higher, its thrusters glowing bright against the darkening sky. Liliana watched helplessly as her only way off this deadly moon disappeared into the clouds. In that moment, she understood what it meant to be truly alone. A low growl behind her broke the silence. She turned slowly to see a Crawl scout watching her from the rocks. The creature stood twice her height, its leathery skin covered in bony plates. 6 yellow eyes tracked her every movement, and its jaws, filled with needle-sharp teeth, opened slightly in what almost looked like a smile. Liliana didn't wait to see more. She ran down the other side of the ridge, away from the extraction point and away from the Crawl. Her scientific mind raced through options as her feet carried her forward. The caves. The network of caves she had mapped during the first week might offer shelter. The larger Crawl couldn't fit through some of the narrower passages. Night was falling fast as Liliana reached the cave entrance. She slipped inside just as rain began to fall, turning the ground to mud. The cave was dark and cold, but it was safe for now. She sat with her back against the stone wall, trying to slow her breathing. Her expedition pack contained emergency rations for 3 days, a water purifier, basic medical supplies, and her research equipment. It wasn't much, but it would keep her alive while she figured out what to do next. "Think logically," she whispered to herself. "The expedition will report me missing. They will send a rescue team." But even as she said it, Liliana knew the truth. The Xylorian Scientific Council didn't risk resources to save individuals. It wasn't practical. Her people valued knowledge and progress above individual lives. The expedition had valuable data about the Crawl. They wouldn't risk more lives just to save hers. She was on her own, stranded on a hostile moon filled with predators that had evolved specifically to hunt beings like her. The Crawl considered Silurian flesh a delicacy. As the sounds of creatures moving in the darkness outside reached her, Liliana activated her light tool and began to plan. If rescue wasn't coming, she would have to survive long enough to find another way off this moon. She was a scientist. She had knowledge. And now she would need to use everything she knew to stay alive. 3 months had passed since Liliana was abandoned on Dracos. She had turned the small cave into a home of sorts. Dried plants hung from the ceiling, some for eating, others for medicine. Her careful mapping had revealed underground streams with clean water. She had survived longer than she thought possible. Every morning, Liliana would climb to a high point to scan the sky for ships. Today was no different. She reached her lookout spot as the first sun rose over the horizon. The second, smaller sun would follow soon. She raised her scanner to the sky, sweeping it across the stars that were still visible in the morning light. Nothing. No ships. No rescue. She was about to climb back down when a flash of light caught her eye. Something was entering the atmosphere of Dracos, leaving a trail of fire behind it. Not a meteor. Its path was too controlled. It was a ship, or part of one. Liliana watched as the object fell toward the surface, disappearing behind distant hills. Smoke rose from the crash site. Her 4 eyes blinked rapidly as she considered what to do. It could be a trap. The Crawl were not advanced enough for space travel, but they were clever hunters. Or it could be a rescue ship, though not sent for her. Either way, it meant technology, a possible way off this moon. She decided to investigate. Grabbing her pack with supplies, Liliana set out toward the crash site. She moved carefully, staying hidden whenever possible. The journey took most of the day. The suns were setting when she reached a ridge overlooking the crash. It wasn't a Xylorian vessel. The design was unfamiliar, boxy and practical, with strange markings. An escape pod, perhaps. Part of it was buried in the dirt, but the hatch had opened. Someone or something had survived. Then she saw him, a being moving around the crash site, collecting items from the wreckage. He stood on 2 legs like her, but was taller and broader. His skin wasn't purple like hers, but a light brown. He had only 2 eyes instead of 4, and strange dark fur on top of his head. He wore a tight-fitting uniform with patches she didn't recognize. Liliana had never seen this species before. Not in person or in any database. She zoomed in with her scanner. The being was injured, limping as he moved, with red blood visible on his leg. Suddenly, her scanner picked up movement from the east. Crawl. A hunting pack, moving fast toward the crash site. The noise must have drawn them. The stranger didn't seem to notice the danger approaching. Liliana had a choice. She could stay hidden and safe. This wasn't her problem. Her survival chances were already low. But something about the stranger made her hesitate. He was alone, injured, and had no idea what was coming. Before she could change her mind, Liliana found herself sliding down the ridge, moving toward the crash site. The stranger looked up, startled by her approach. His hand moved to a device at his hip. A weapon, probably. Crawl coming, Liliana said, pointing toward the approaching threat. Bad creatures. Will kill you. The stranger didn't understand her words, but her urgent gestures made him look in the direction she pointed. He saw the dust cloud raised by the charging Crawl pack. His eyes widened. He said something in his own language, words she couldn't understand, but the tone was clear. Fear. Understanding. Follow, Liliana said, motioning with her hand. I know safe place. The stranger hesitated only a moment before nodding. He grabbed a small pack and a metal box from the crashed pod. Liliana led the way, moving as quickly as the stranger's injury would allow. Behind them, the first howls of the Crawl pack rose into the darkening sky. The hunt had begun. The cave entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for the human to squeeze through. Liliana led the way, moving quickly through the dark passages. She could hear the Crawl outside, their claws scraping against rock as they searched for a way in. They too big for small tunnels, she said, even though she knew the stranger couldn't understand her. Speaking helped calm her nerves. The human limped behind her, his breathing heavy. When they reached the larger chamber that Liliana called home, he collapsed against the wall, his face tight with pain. He said something in his language, then pointed to himself. Hélène, he said clearly, tapping his chest. Liliana understood. A name. She pointed to herself. Liliana. Liliana. Alan repeated, his pronunciation strange but recognizable. He smiled, showing flat teeth very different from her own pointed ones. Liliana moved to examine his injured leg. A deep cut ran along his thigh, still bleeding. She reached for her medical kit, but Alan pulled his own from his pack. He removed a small device and ran it over the wound. The bleeding slowed. Advanced, Liliana said, impressed by the technology. She pointed to the device. Good medicine. Over the next few days, they developed a simple way to communicate. Alan was quick to learn a few words of her language, and she picked up some of his. They used gestures and drawings to fill the gaps. Liliana learned that Alan was part of something called Earth Fleet. His ship, the U.S. Horizon, had been damaged in a solar storm. The escape pods had scattered across the system. He didn't know if any other crew members had survived. In turn, she told him about being left behind by her expedition team. Alan seemed shocked by this. He kept saying a word, wrong, and shaking his head. Liliana didn't understand why he was so upset. It was logical to sacrifice one for the good of many. That was the Tylorian way. On the 5th day, Alan was strong enough to walk without pain. He asked to see his crash site again. They needed supplies from the pod, he explained with simple words and gestures. Most importantly, they needed to retrieve his beacon, a device to call for help. Liliana was hesitant. The crawl might still be watching the area. But Alan was determined. He showed her a weapon from his pack, a small device that fired energy bursts. This made her feel a little safer. They left at dawn, taking a route that avoided known crawl territories. When they reached the crash site, Alan moved quickly to salvage parts from the pod. He worked with skilled hands, connecting wires and adjusting components. How long? Liliana asked, keeping watch for danger. Alan held up 10 fingers, then pointed to the suns crossing the sky. 10 days for the beacon to work, she understood. As Alan worked, Liliana noticed a change in the air, a stillness that made her skin tingle with warning. She scanned the horizon and saw dust rising in the distance. Alan, she said urgently. Crawl coming. Many crawl. He looked up from his work, then quickly packed the beacon parts into his bag. Too late to run back to the caves. They needed a closer hiding place. Water, Liliana said suddenly, remembering the small lake nearby. Crawl hate water. Alan nodded, understanding immediately. They ran toward the lake, reaching its shore just as the crawl hunting party crested the hill behind them. Without hesitation, they'd waded into the water, moving deeper until only their heads remained above the surface. The crawl stopped at the water's edge, growling in frustration. Their prey was beyond reach, for now, but they could wait. And crawl were very patient hunters. The water was cold as night fell. Liliana and Alan had been in the lake for hours, only their heads above the surface. The crawl remained on shore, pacing back and forth, unwilling to enter the water but equally unwilling to leave their prey. We need plan, Liliana whispered. Her body temperature was dropping dangerously low. Alan nodded, his teeth chattering. He pointed to the far side of the lake where thick plants grew near the water's edge. Then he pulled out his energy weapon and made a motion like shooting at the crawl. Liliana understood. Create a distraction, then escape through the plants. It was risky, but better than freezing to death in the lake. Alan aimed his weapon at a rock formation far from their planned escape route. He fired 3 quick bursts. The energy blasts hit the rocks, causing small explosions. The crawl turned toward the noise, several rushing to investigate. Now, Alan whispered. They moved silently through the water toward the plants. Just as they reached the edge, one of the crawl turned back, spotting their movement. It let out a howl that alerted the others. Run, Alan shouted, no longer worrying about being quiet. They burst from the water, racing for the dense plant growth. The crawl charged after them, closing the distance quickly. Alan turned and fired his weapon, hitting the lead crawl in the chest. It fell with a screech, but the others kept coming. Liliana pulled Alan into the thick plants. They crawled through narrow spaces, hearing the crawl thrashing behind them, trying to follow but too large to fit through the tight gaps. By dawn, they had lost their pursuers and made it back to the cave entrance. Alan's beacon parts were safe in his waterproof bag. They collapsed inside, exhausted but alive. Over the next week, their routine became simple. Alan worked on the beacon while Liliana gathered food and kept watch. They improved their communication each day, teaching each other more words. "Why crawl hunt your kind?" Aelin asked one evening as they ate. Liliana tried to explain. "Xylorian blood," she said, pointing to her own veins. "Special taste for crawl. Like sweet drink to them." Aelin frowned. "Bad luck." "Yes," Liliana agreed. "Bad luck." On the 8th day, disaster struck. Liliana went alone to gather plants while Alan worked on the beacon. She was careful, staying alert, but she didn't notice the small crawl, a juvenile, hiding among the rocks until it was too late. The young crawl leaped at her, its claws catching her arm. Liliana fought back, using her knife to slash at its face. The creature retreated, howling in pain. That howl would bring others. Liliana ran, clutching her bleeding arm. She was halfway back to the cave when she heard the hunting pack behind her. They were closing fast, too fast. She wouldn't make it. Suddenly, a loud sound split the air. Alan stood at the top of a ridge, firing his weapon into the air. The crawl hesitated, confused by the new threat. "Here!" Alan shouted to her, waving his arm. Liliana changed direction, running toward him. The crawl followed, now charging at both of them. When she reached Alan, he grabbed her hand and pulled her toward a narrow crack in the rocks she hadn't noticed before. "Found new passage," he explained as they squeezed inside. "Connects to our cave." The crawl couldn't follow through the tight space. Their angry howls echoed through the passage as Liliana and Alan made their way back to safety. In the cave, Alan treated Liliana's wound with medicine from his pack. His touch was gentle as he wrapped her arm. "You came for me," Liliana said, still surprised. "Why risk life?" Alan looked at her, his expression serious. "Humans don't leave people behind," he said simply. "Not if we can help." Liliana didn't know what to say. This was so different from the Tylorian way. She had much to think about. The beacon was finally working. Alan had placed it on the highest point near their cave, hidden from the crawl, but with a clear signal to the sky. Now all they could do was wait and hope someone would hear it. That night, as they sat in the safety of their cave, the air outside filled with the howls of distant crawl. The sound always made Liliana's skin crawl, but she felt safer with Alan nearby. "How long for help to come?" she asked, warming her hands by their small fire. Alan shrugged. "Hard to say. Days. Maybe weeks." He looked at her with curiosity. "Tell me about your home. Your people." Liliana thought about how to explain Silurian society with her limited shared vocabulary. Silurians value knowledge, science, progress. She paused. "Individual not important. Only whole species matters." "Is that why they left you?" Alan asked. She nodded. "One life not worth risk to many. Logical choice." Alan frowned. "Doesn't seem right to me. On Earth, we try not to leave anyone behind." "Why?" Liliana asked. "Not logical." "Maybe not always logical," Alan admitted, "but human. We believe each life has value." This idea was strange to Liliana. Among her people, the collective was everything. Individual lives were just parts of a greater whole, replaceable and sometimes necessarily sacrificed. "Tell me about Earth," she said, wanting to understand this different way of thinking. Alan smiled. "Earth is beautiful. Blue oceans, green forests, mountains, deserts, many different environments. Many different people, too." "Different species?" Liliana asked, surprised. "No, all human, but different cultures, languages, beliefs." Alan's eyes grew distant, as if seeing his home. "We haven't always gotten along. Had many wars, did terrible things to each other. Still do sometimes, but we're learning. Trying to be better." Liliana was fascinated. "Xylorians all same. Think same. Act same. No war between us." "Sounds peaceful," Alan said. "Yes, but maybe." She hesitated, not sure how to express her thought. Maybe something missing. They talked through the night. Alan told stories about Earth's history, about human art and music, about family and friendship. Liliana shared what she knew of the galaxy, of the many worlds her people had studied, of the wonders and dangers they had catalogued. As the first sun began to rise, Alan asked, "What will you do? If we both get rescued, will you go back to your people?" The question caught Liliana by surprise. She had never considered any other option. Return to Xyloria, continue her work, contribute to the collective knowledge. That was her purpose. But now, after everything she had experienced, after meeting Alan, "Not sure," she admitted. "Xyloria is home. But, Alan prompted gently. "Now I see different way to think, different way to live." She looked at him. "You risk life for me. No Xylorian would do that." Alan reached out slowly and placed his hand over hers. His skin was warmer than hers, with 5 fingers instead of 6. Different, but not so different that they couldn't connect. "Whatever you decide," he said, "you won't be alone." The moment was interrupted by a loud beeping sound. Alan jumped up and grabbed his communicator. His face lit up with excitement. "Someone heard the beacon," he said. "They're coming." Liliana felt both joy and uncertainty. Rescue meant safety, but it also meant choices she never expected to make. The good news from the beacon didn't last long. Alan's face changed as he listened to the message on his communicator. "They received our signal," he explained to Liliana. "But the nearest ship is 2 weeks away." Liliana looked outside the cave entrance. Dark clouds filled the sky. "Bad timing," she said. "Cold season comes. Crawl get desperate for food." Alan nodded grimly. "We need to prepare." Over the next few days, they worked to make their cave more secure. Alan set traps around the entrance, while Liliana gathered extra food and medicine. They collected water from the underground stream and stored it in containers from Alan's escape pod. 4 days after the beacon message, the first snow fell on Dracos. Liliana had never seen it before. The white flakes fascinated her, but she knew what it meant. Food would become scarce, and the Crawl would grow more aggressive in their hunt. On the 5th night of the cold season, they heard it, a low, rhythmic drumming. Not the usual wild howls of the Crawl, but something organized, something deliberate. Alan peered out through a small gap in the rocks they had placed across the cave entrance. "Many Crawl," he whispered, "more than I've ever seen. And they're not running around randomly. They're forming lines." Liliana joined him at the gap. What she saw made her blood run cold. Dozens of Crawl stood in the valley below their cave, arranged in ordered groups. At their center was a massive Crawl, nearly twice the size of the others. Its skin was darker, almost black, and patterns of scars covered its body. "Shadow Hunter," Liliana breathed. "Leader of all Crawl. Only stories about this one. Never seen before." The giant Crawl raised its head and let out a roar that shook the ground. As if responding to a command, the other Crawl began to advance toward the cave. "They're coming for us," Alan said, checking his weapon. "This is a coordinated attack." Liliana's mind raced. They learned, adapted. Never seen Crawl work together like this. The first wave reached the traps Alan had set. Explosions went off, scattering the creatures, but more came behind them. Some fell into hidden pits, others were caught by snares, but there were too many. "We need a better plan," Alan said, firing his weapon at the advancing Crawl. "We can't fight them all." Liliana thought hard about everything she knew about Crawl behavior. They follow Shadow Hunter. If leader falls, others might run. Alan looked at the massive Crawl directing the attack. "That's a big target, and it's staying back, letting the others come first." "Need to draw it closer," Liliana said. Then an idea struck her. "Crawl hunt by smell. My blood attracts them most." Alan's eyes widened as he realized what she was suggesting. No, too dangerous. But Liliana was already unwrapping the bandage on her arm where the young crawl had clawed her. The wound was healing, but when she pressed it, fresh blood appeared. I go outside, get attention of Shadow Hunter, she explained. You shoot from high rock. She pointed to a ledge above the cave entrance. Good position. They'll tear you apart before I can take the shot. Alan argued. Not if we use water. Liliana pointed to a narrow path that led to a small pool fed by a waterfall. I stay near water. Crawl hesitate to follow. Alan shook his head. Still too risky. There has to be another way. A loud crash interrupted them as several crawl began smashing at the rocks blocking the cave entrance. They were running out of time. No other way, Liliana insisted. Trust me. Their eyes met, and after a moment, Alan nodded reluctantly. I'll cover you. But at the first sign of trouble, you run back inside. Promise me. Promise. Liliana said, though she wasn't sure she could keep it. Saving Alan had become more important to her than she ever expected. The plan worked better than either of them expected. Liliana ran to the pool, letting drops of her blood mark the path. The crawl went wild at the scent, including the Shadow Hunter, who pushed forward through its own kind to reach the prize. Alan positioned himself on the high rock, his weapon ready. He waited until the massive leader was fully exposed before taking the shot. The energy blast hit the Shadow Hunter directly in the chest. The creature staggered but didn't fall. It took 2 more shots before the giant crawl finally collapsed. The effect on the other crawl was immediate. Without their leader, they fell into confusion, some fleeing, others fighting among themselves. Liliana ran back to the cave where Alan waited. Together, they sealed the entrance again. We did it, Alan said, breathing hard. For now, Liliana cautioned, they will return, maybe with new leader. But the crawl didn't return. Days passed with no sign of them. Perhaps without the Shadow Hunter to unite them, they had gone back to their separate hunting grounds. On the 12th day after the beacon signal, Alan's communicator beeped. They're coming, he said, his face bright with hope. Tomorrow, ships will land in the valley. Liliana felt both joy and sadness. Good news, she said, though her voice lacked enthusiasm. Alan noticed. What's wrong? Not sure where I belong now, she admitted. Changed too much for Xyloria. But no place among humans either. Alan took her hand. You could come with me. Earth has never met a Xylorian before. You could be the first. A bridge between our people. The idea was both frightening and exciting. Before she could answer, the ground shook. They rushed to the cave entrance and looked up to see a massive ship breaking through the clouds. Not human design, Alan said, frowning. Liliana recognized it immediately. Xylorian science vessel. A second ship appeared, smaller and sleeker. That one is human, Alan confirmed, checking his communicator. The U.S. Liberty. They got here faster than expected. Both ships landed in the valley. From the Xylorian vessel emerged 5 tall figures in protective suits. From the human ship came a team in uniforms similar to Alan's. Alan and Liliana walked down to meet them. The human team rushed forward when they saw Alan, their faces showing relief and happiness. The Xylorians approached more slowly, their movements stiff and formal. The lead Xylorian spoke to Liliana in their language. Researcher Liliana, your survival is unexpected. The data you've collected will be valuable to the collective. No greeting, no joy at finding her alive, just cold assessment of her value as a data source. The human captain embraced Alan. Lieutenant Carter, we thought we'd lost you. The whole crew has been searching nonstop since the accident. The contrast couldn't be more clear. The Xylorian leader turned to Alan. This primitive helped you survive. Liliana felt anger rise in her. His name is Alan. He saved my life many times. He is not primitive. The Xylorian leader ignored her words. We depart in 1 hour. Prepare your research materials. The human captain stepped forward. We thank you for helping our officer. Would you like to visit Earth as our honored guest? We could learn much from each other. Liliana looked between the two groups. The Kylorians stood apart, cold and distant. The humans clustered together, with Alan among them, warm and welcoming. In that moment, her decision became clear. I choose to go with humans, she announced. The Kylorian leader showed no emotion. Illogical choice. You belong with your kind. Liliana shook her head. I found new kind of belonging. She moved to stand beside Alan. Found new home. As the Kylorian ship departed without her, Liliana didn't feel regret. Looking up at the stars from the deck of the human vessel, with Alan's hand in hers, she knew she had made the right choice. Sometimes, salvation came in unexpected forms.